Let's talk about some historical rates. This chart shows T-bill rates, inflation, and real rates from 1926 to 2012. These are average annualized rates, so we do not have the rate over the whole holding period. We simply have it per year on average. So we have annualized rates here for all months. T-bills is 3.55, inflation is 3%. So the real rate of return, remember we're looking for real rates of return, is 0.5% per month. The first half is a very small difference here of T-bills are 1.79, inflation 1.74. Your real rate of return is very small. The most recent half is much higher, which is interesting, 5.35 to 4.36. I'll explain that in just a second when we look at the historical models. And so when we start talking about historical differences, you can see that the real rates of return differ across time frames, but they're still not so significantly different that we think of them as being a great investment or a bad investment. The real rate of return here is still averaging on an annual basis not very much. So let's look at it historically. And here's the history chart from 1926 to 2012 for interest rates and inflation. The T-bills are the black line. Inflation, of course, is the blue line. You can see here inflation went crazy in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and the T-bill was incredibly low here. And so this part of monetary policy was dedicated to learning a little bit about how better to involve the Federal Reserve and the government into the monetary system. They pegged interest rates very low on the T-bills, yet we have very high inflation. That is a significant problem, and we no longer do that. As you can see, we came along here and we started to see rampant inflation. I lived through this. In fact, right here at the peak is right when I was graduating high school. I graduated high school in 1980, and it was not unusual to have a home loan that was at 15%. It was not unusual to have credit cards that were paying 30 or over 30% interest on your credit card, and prices were rising dramatically. So this is not even hyperinflation. This was very high inflation, but not hyperinflation. So this was an interest rate peak for us. And as you can see, since then, it's been coming down, and now it is very, very low. In 2012 to 2017, T-bills would be very, very low. Inflation would be somewhat low. I wouldn't say it is nearly as low as the T-bills, but it would be somewhat low as well. So you can see historically that the first half and the second half of this almost 90-year time period is completely different. That has lots to do with how the monetary system was managed in the 1970s here that caused a great deal of the spike of inflation. We got off the gold standard, for example. So we had a gold standard here for quite a while, and the Bretton Woods Accord, etc. We got off of that in the early 70s, and when we did, we got a spike of inflation. But since then, we've managed to calm it down a little bit. So remember, interest rates are incredibly important for investing. If interest rates go up, investing is going to be less, of course, because it's harder to fund the investment or get a net present value based on higher rates of interest. And if interest rates get lower and there are more funds available, then we'll have more we'll have more investment because more firms will borrow money and start to develop new products and new projects and so on. So there's a little historical context in interest rates and inflation, and we can keep going.